Good morning, everybody. My name is Terry Johnson. I'm the president of the Association for Consulting Expertise, or ACE. We'll get to the panel on pricing in just a minute, but first I want to just give a background on what ACE is and what's coming up. So ACE is a nonprofit association of professionals, and we provide an array of services to businesses, other nonprofits, and other organizations. The primary benefits that ACE provides is networking, connecting with and developing relationships with other consultants and service providers to build your referral network. It's about learning, building your professional skills with online and in-person programming. And it's about promotion, where we help to increase visibility for your business and expertise, primarily through things like the Ask ACE columns and Main Biz, our association with the Greater Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I don't think that was exactly the right title, but anyway. So there's lots of things happening, and a couple of things happening after this event on Thursday, April 13th. So not the third Friday, but Thursday, April 13th at 4:30. We'll be at Sea Dog Brewing in Western Avenue in South Portland for our networking roundtable. And that roundtable topic will be finding your ideal client. So this will be an informal networking conversation, not a formal program. In May, our program was back to the third Friday, May 19th at 9 o'clock. It'll be via Zoom, and Cassie Crosby will be talking with us about commitment management and how to meet your commitments. But today's program is our panel discussion on pricing our services. So I'd like to turn this over to Tom Renehan at this point, who will be moderating our panel. And welcome our panelists. Tom?
Great, thanks, Terry. I'm happy to have a distinguished panel with us today. And normally I start on the adage of age before beauty, but I'm going to reverse that today and start with Allie and save Sam for last. But Allie Land is joining us as a guest, and she's a business advisor and associate center director for the Maine Small Business Development Center at CEI, Coastal Enterprises. She advises small businesses on general needs and of all the general needs of small business. And by the way, that advising does include sole proprietors, consultants, and service providers. Allie has a bachelor's degree and an MBA from the University of Maine. Bob LaBrie is also joining us, owner of LaBrie Training and Consulting. And he has developed 36 training modules that selects and combines in a comprehensive format to customize his training to meet his clients' exact needs. Seminars can range in length from 1 hour to a full week, depending on the needs of his customers. Bob is an ACE member also. Sam Bishop, who is also an ACE member, is the managing principal of the PACE Consulting Group, which is a general management consulting firm working with small and medium-sized businesses throughout New England in startup, emerging, and turnaround mode. As Sam likes to say, he has been doing this for a very long time. By the way, people who are new to Sam don't know him. If you see him rocking, that's because he lives on Portland Harbor in a boat. So he may just be a little shaky at times. So don't worry about it. I can make my screen bigger. So thank you all for being here and be willing to discuss a kind of a sensitive topic a lot with service providers and consultants. People don't like to talk about pricing. The format, I'm going to have some startup questions for you today for our panel to answer. But if anybody, and we have some new people coming in here, which is wonderful, have any questions, you can either raise your hand and flag me down, or put it in the chat, and I will put it to the appropriate panelist. So let's start with general question. I'll start with Sam on this one, and we'll go to Bob and then Allie. If you were advising a new consultant, how would they come up with their value, or in other words, an hourly rate?
Oh, wow. Value is oftentimes in the eye of the beholder, I guess, but establishing value really, I think, comes from, what you do and how you've done it with others who can give you some credibility. It's a very very challenging subject. And I'm not an expert at probably establishing value. I consider my value being that I've been doing this for a very long time with many companies and have learned a lot. And so some of my value is in what I call wisdom, I guess. And that comes with time. I don't feel my value, when I first started, was certainly less obvious or less, it's not as easy when you're starting out, unless you're doing something that is pretty specific. In my case, I'm a generalist, so I do a little bit of whatever is needed at the time with the companies I work with. I look at things holistically and trying to place a value on the results that they could expect from what I would be able to do is a little less specific than it would be if I was selling IT services or, some specialized area. So that makes it, for me, has made it more challenging because it's not as clearly evident what I can say I'm going to produce for you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Bob, same question. If you were advising a new consultant, how would you suggest that they find their value, or in other words, their hourly rate?
It's a good question, because a lot of times when I'm working with a brand new consultant, they don't feel like they can charge what a consultant that maybe have been in business for a long time can charge. Their value is based on the experience they bring to the table, not on the fact that they're a new consultant. So one of the first things I would say is, what were you making, as far as a salary, and then help them to find out, what their expenses are, and then together figure out what other people are charging and come up with something very, very close. They don't have to have, if they've got 20 years experience doing project management, but they're a brand new consultant, they still bring in 20 years experience as a project manager to the table. So they're able to charge more than they think they are, not just because, they're brand new, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Allie, same question to you.
Hasn't been made evident by Bob and Sam. It's definitely not a black and white formulated decision. And I think sometimes people come into a new business thinking, oh, well, everybody else knows what they're doing. This should be super easy, and it's not. Mm-hmm. I guess I would recommend starting with what's the product, similar to what Sam said, what service are you offering? Is it generalized? Is it specialized? Who's the target market for that service? Keeping in mind the size of the business, the income capabilities, who is it that you're serving and what are they able to spend? I would also look at it from the other side of the coin of the costs and the overhead to make sure that you're charging enough. I think, like Bob said, it can be very tempting to undervalue yourself when you're a new consultant. It's a very uncomfortable thing to think about your own knowledge having value to someone else, because you don't realize how important that is to someone else, because it's all up in your head. Mm-hmm. I would often encourage folks to set up some financial projections, keeping in mind their goals for their own personal income, keeping in mind their overhead that they have. Also keeping in mind the money that they've spent to get started, whether it's, professional development, certifications, education, all of that. It's easy to sort of forget those things when they're not a monthly bill that you're still paying, but they're very much part of your costs, even if they are sunk. And full disclosure, so my services, I work with mostly startups and very small businesses. So folks who are just getting off the ground, who have very little to no money. I'd say probably 80 to 90% of my advising clients have 5 employees or less, and many are just single person sole proprietorships or single member LLCs with no employees. So I am a publicly funded resource. We're funded in part by the Small Business Administration and in part by the nonprofit that I work for. And my services are completely free to my clients. So full disclosure in that I'm speaking from that perspective as an advisor, and I advise on a much higher level than you all do when you dig in deep with your clients and help them sort of do the work. So that's my take on that.
Thanks, Sally. Next point of discussion, Bob, I'll start with you this time. What type of pricing strategies are good for a consulting practice or sole proprietor? Do they bundle services, hourly rate? You know, what type of strategies should they look at?
There's all kinds of different ways. You can price daily, you can price hourly, you can price by project or fixed pricing. You can do retainer. I mean, there's so many different ways. What I would do is find out what would work for them. Like if someone asks me, what do you charge per hour? I say, I don't charge per hour. I charge by the project. I take a look at what the entire project is going to, how much time it's going to take. Then I kind of figure out what my expenses, direct expenses are going to be, which means if I'm going to do a manual for them or if I'm going to travel. Like if I used to go to Vermont, and when I did, I had to take into account, 3 days in a motel, food, the whole 9 yards. I had to take all that into consideration. That becomes part of pricing. So the average, I've done some research on this stuff, and the average overhead is about $80 an hour. So if you want to make $75,000 a year, figure out what your billable hours are. A good billable time might be 25 hours a week. 25 comes out to about 1,250 or so billable hours a year. When you divide that into 75, it's about $60 an hour. If you add 80 to 60, you're gonna have to charge $140 an hour to pay your bills and make $75,000. So I would sit down with them and I would actually just break down, what are your expenses? One of the reasons I have my own home and I have an office here is I don't have rent to worry about. And I write off this portion of the house. So it's exactly 9.46% of my overall cost of everything that's spent in the house, heat, the whole 9 yards. So I'm able to take that and reduce the expenses, quite frankly, because I work out of the house. If you have an office, well, then now you have to take into account all kinds of things. That helps.
Yep, great. Thanks, Bob. Alex, I'll go to the same question to you. What type of pricing strategies would you advise for a sole proprietor? Do they bundle services? Do they start with an hourly rate?
I wouldn't add any new strategies to that list. I would just emphasize consistency, being able to justify where you've landed with folks. I think when you're a new consultant, it can be tempting to try to finagle the pricing to fit the client. And it can be very tempting, they start to haggle with you. All of a sudden you start to question your value and you're like, well, maybe I can come down to that. But then when you go to justify your price to the next client, it gets very wishy-washy. So I would just say, implement a structure. It's probably going to have a lot of variables, but be consistent with how you come to your number and understand that if someone isn't interested in spending that, if they start to haggle with you, they may not be a good fit for the value that you have to offer.
Great. And Sam, same question to you. Pricing strategies, and do they bundle services or hourly?
I, like the others, I don't, I've never charged hourly. I avoid that completely because it's just, I don't want to watch the clock, and I don't want them to be, looking at the meter. That's not what I sell. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. So again, for me, it starts really with a couple of things. One, the clients that you're working with. In my situation, I work with small companies. Many of them are in startup mode, emerging. Many I did a lot of turnaround work in the past. And one of the things they all seem to have in common, or most of them, is that none of them have any money. Which makes it challenging. So in some situations, I try and, I know what I would like to get for whatever the project is, because I've done a lot of them. So I probably have a pretty good idea of how much time it's going to take. But then I also look at, what can they afford, what's reasonable. And so I very often will start with a phased approach to doing a project. Because again, the budget side of things is going to be critical to them. And so I'll say, okay, well, the goal is to improve productivity by 10%. So before we do that, why don't we have a phase one where we do a sort of a investigation or a diagnostic phase to determine exactly where the opportunities are the greatest, and that's going to be X. And then when we get to the end of that, we really don't know what the implementation of that might be. So it could be in a range of, 10 to 20,000 or whatever the number might be. But you don't lock it in at that point. So that's the way I've been doing it. Another factor, to be honest, is how hungry I am. The consulting business for me has never been a nice steady flow of clients that are there backed up, waiting for you to start the next project. So it's a feast or famine proposition often, and the famine can be fairly dramatic. So if I'm hungry enough, I might discount my rate just to get my foot in the door. So there's a lot of variables that go into it. And it's not, as Ali said, it's not a black and white cookie cutter kind of approach. It makes a difference what you're selling. If you've got something fairly specific that you're going to be doing, I think it's a lot easier for a client to understand that correcting a specific problem, again, whether it's IT or whether it's a marketing issue or just in time production challenge, something like that. There's a more of a black and white start and stop to that kind of a project.
Cool. And our resident CPA, Alison Bishops, reminds us to factor in self-employment and income taxes. A lot of people, when they go into their own business, don't even think about the whole tax situation. And that can shock some people at the end of the year if they don't put the money aside for taxes. So Ali, and I'll go to you on this because I'm sure you advise your clients on that. And probably a bad question for you because you already disclosed that you're free. But when new clients, when you're advising new clients, and do they consider pro bono work? And so the second part of that is how much free is enough?
That's a good question. I find I have a lot of clients that want to service a low income market. And this is, this isn't necessarily just consulting clients. This is across the board, other service and even product-based businesses. They want to serve it. They want to help people. They're getting into small business as more of a passion project. Yes, they want to create a living for themselves and whatnot, but sometimes they see their target market as different than what it should be. And then I have to kind of work with them to understand, well, your target market, it needs to have the spending capability. Especially with consulting work, they need to be able to afford it. I think it was Sam that said a lot of clients, they come to him and they have no money. So it's trying to figure out where's that fit between how do you help people out, whether it's at a pro bono or discounted rate, but how do you also make enough money so that you personally can eat? And I think it comes back. I spend a lot of time in spreadsheets helping people with financial projections to figure out exactly how much work you need to keep food on your table, to pay your overhead, to pay those taxes, and set aside enough, understanding that they're not all coming out right away. And I force people to put it down on paper. And sometimes when those numbers line up, they don't realize, all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize how much I was spending every month or how much I need to make. or, how many clients I need at my current pricing rate to cover these costs and still make a little bit of a profit at the end of the day. So I'll use that as a tool to show my clients that if they are doing too much pro bono work, if they're spending, half of the hours that they have to commit to their business doing work for free, it's not enough to cover those costs. So as far as how to decide how much pro bono or discounted work you can do, I think it depends on your costs. It depends on your goals, why you're doing what you're doing. If you're in this as a side gig or a passion project and you're not looking to pull much income, do as much as you want. A business doesn't have to be, a full-time endeavor that pays you a full salary. A business can be a more of a passion project. It all depends on what you want out of your business, I think.
Mm-hmm. Good. Hey, Ali, this is probably a good question for you. It came up in the chat that from Carrie. She talks about grants. Do you have a lot of experience with grants with your clients? And if so, what's a good source for them?
Sure. Yeah, I get asked about grants a lot, and I usually disappoint a lot of people. So we work with, as you all are, I believe, for-profits. And unfortunately, the grant world, if you're a nonprofit structure, there are grants. But as far as for-profits, their grants are sort of few and far between. During COVID, there was obviously a lot of talk about grants for profits. And I think it's created this sort of public misconception that there's grant money out there. I get a lot of questions about special, hey, are there grants for women? Are there grants for minority? What? And even that is become a misconception. There isn't a lot out there. The few that I do find are at the municipal level. Sometimes local cities and towns have some grant money to contribute to facade improvement or low-income household businesses. There's some different categories of grants there. At the state level, the Department of Economic and Community Development was the agency that was implementing a lot of the COVID relief funds. And there's actually still a lot of that trickling down as far as businesses that started during COVID and couldn't get relief. So I would say the main DECD is a source. Federally, not a lot. And I would just urge caution, because if you Google grants for small businesses, you'll find a lot. And unfortunately, most of them are large federal programs put on by, FedEx or other organizations like that, it's a couple $1,000s here and there. And it's a highly competitive nationwide program that unless you're the perfect fit, you're not likely to get it. And industry specific grants would be the other category where I would look. So municipal, state grants, and industry specific. And I think, ACE is a great group to be involved in. If there are grants specific to the consulting world, I would expect, you folks to know about them before I even know, where I work with businesses across industries.
Go ahead, Sam.
Tom, I've got a little add to that. MTI has tech grants that are open to companies who are in need, or early stage companies, and unless they've changed it, a good portion of that tech grant can be used for consulting services, like to build a business plan or to do a marketing study or to do some kind of technical assistance. And so I'm pretty sure that program is still open, but it needs to be related with to a company that is, an early stage and is qualified to get into the MTI system.
Yeah, and a subset of that, Sam, is their Merck program right now, where they're working with consultants.
Yeah, and the other one is CEI occasionally has a taste master. It's for food related agriculture and food, where they have some grant monies for
Tastemakers.
Consulting services.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't Carrie have one from, is it CMCC? That was available for trainers? Because she had sent me something on, I can't remember where it was.
I think it was Priscilla.
Yeah, Priscilla. I'm sorry, not Carrie.
Yeah.
Priscilla, you're right.
I've also had luck with the food Food Network out of Boston. Again, it's more agriculture and food related, but they also have covered my fees for various projects.
Didn't know you were a foodie.
I'm not. I am a foodie, but that's not my specialty, although I like eating.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, Ali, with your being familiar with grants, probably more so than the three of us, Matthew asked about low profit LLCs or L3C grants. Have you ever heard of that?
Heard of the structure. I can't speak to grant availability for L3Cs. I would assume it's somewhere in between. I would assume it's still fairly limited as it is for for-profits, but I don't know any more than that.
Okay. Thanks. And Carrie says Focus Maine or Focus ME has grants as well. Getting back to our questioning, and thanks for the participation, everybody. Sam, and we talked about this on the pre-work. You talked a little bit about pro bono. So when do you consider pro bono, and how much free is enough?
Well, pro bono for me has been a business development tool as well, or strategy. It started when I was living in Connecticut, and I was on the board of the local chapter for the Turnaround Management Association, and we went to the state of Connecticut and offered pro bono services to evaluate companies coming to the state to either move into the state or were there and were struggling and needed some financial assistance. And the purpose of the pro bono work was that there would be 3 people out of a group of a dozen that would go into a business and do a one-day quick and dirty kind of evaluation to determine, is the company ready? It's not, it's not a yay, nay, give them the money. It's a yay, nay, they are prepared, they've done their homework, they've got their act together, they've got a business plan or whatever. And 9 out of 10 times they aren't ready. And so the state at that point would say, well, you got to do your homework. And if you need some help doing your homework, you need to get that. And they would look around the room and say, well, there's 3 people that were here that probably could help me. So the state would pay half of their fee. So that led, when I was living in Connecticut, to a lot of work because it kind of got you the foot in the door. And when I moved to Maine 25 years ago, I went up to Augusta to talk to the business development people at the DECD and got a very receptive meeting, but no enthusiasm for taking on such a program. And later in life, as I was very active in ACE at the time, several of us at ACE, and I think Steve Jenks is here today, and another Jeff Lambden, the 3 of us went to what is now MCE when Steve Bazinet was talking about starting the Top Gun program. And we offered ACE's service to do these kinds of evaluations. And anyway, to make a long story short, doing a little pro bono work through any of these organizations has very often been a good lead in to kind of show your clients, your prospective clients, what you can do. And it gets your foot in the door and can lead to a longer term relationship. So that's one of the pro bono advantages to me, has been, doing pro bono work has been a business development tool. And I've been very active with MCE's mentor network, and thanks to Terry, he's invited me into several assessments and whatnot, and several of them have led to longer term relationships.
Thanks for that, Sam. I was going to bring it up because one of our participants also brought up volunteer work is essentially what you're talking about, and MCE is a great outlet for that. Bob, do you consider pro bono work? And if so, how much free is enough?
Good question. When I first launched the business, it was in 2000. 9/11 happened shortly after that. And the Red Cross was really having a hard time when they had to throw away a lot of the blood that they did. So I got involved with them on a pro bono basis. I usually took on 2 clients a year pro bono. One of them that year was the Red Cross, and it was to help them. Even their average people who give every 6 weeks stopped giving because they were angry that all the blood was thrown away because there were no survivors. So long story short is I went in and I helped their telemarketing work with coming up with new scripting and new ideas on how to talk to people about what happened and why they had to do what they did. That led to training in Massachusetts. They had a big call center in Massachusetts years ago. Now they don't have that anymore, but I went and did the training down there, and that was paid as a result of what the pro bono. Sometimes I'll take something on like the Maine Children's Home for Little Wanderers or something like that up in, I took that on just to help them out because they were having a tough time one year. They weren't getting a lot of the donations that they were getting. I try to keep it down to 1 or 2 a year, and I take a look at what's the potential going forward. For example, I either would help them on a pro bono or I would give them financing and help out so that downstream, a company I worked with 5 years ago now is opening up a $12 million company. And I just got a phone call yesterday that they want me to go in and do the training for them just because of what I did, quite a while ago. So you're right, Sam, it does lead, a lot of that stuff does lead to paid work downstream. But you also gotta, what's your passion? Do you want to help people out? I think that's a real big part of it.
Yeah,
I think that's why we're all in this business.
Yep.
it feels good.
Yeah.
Sonia asked a question.
As far as just you asked also, Tom, about when's enough enough.
Mm.
That's a very there's not, again, a black and white answer to it, at least for me. I've gotten involved with some companies where I've ended up on my own nickel going out to an island off of Acadia National Park for a couple of months before I finally said enough is enough. So it depends a little bit on, what kind of a relationship you have with the client. But once I said enough was enough, they coughed up and we figured it out. Another part of the pricing thing, strategy, I meant to mention, because again, working with oftentimes companies that are strapped for cash, I've allowed them to pay me upfront, but on a weekly basis instead of all at once. Because if it's a $10,000 phase or something like that, getting half of it up front could really, cash flow wise, choke them. So, I'll say, okay, give me $1,000 a week or something like that. And that's a lot easier for them to stretch their tight cash.
Cool. I'll throw this question out to in general, whoever wants to jump on it, and this is from Sonia. How important do you think it is to establish anchor clients in your practice? And I would assume that would be, Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, a recurring client, somebody that you go to on a monthly basis or something like that. So what do you think about anchor clients and how important is it?
I can speak to that. My goal in life since I started consulting was to have a couple of anchor clients, and they're not easy to come by.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in the world that I work in, because of the small companies, since I moved to Maine, I've been a lot luckier than I ever was in Connecticut, although I had several. And I look at an anchor client as somebody who is on a retainer for a long enough period of time that I can kind of count on a paycheck coming in from them. And I've done a fair amount over the years of interim management where I actually run companies for periods of time. And that's been, again, very financially, very, very good, because I never commit 100% of my time to even the interim management projects, although I might spend 50, 60 hours a week doing it. But I leave Fridays open supposedly to do business development and keep my oar in. And Bob LaBrie would remember that I had a fairly long stint with a company here in Portland that unfortunately is no longer here. And he was very, very helpful in doing some sales training work. And we collaborate a lot through ACE on some of these projects. But anyway, yeah, I'm all for, right now I have 3 on retainer, which is 2 is plenty, 3 is great, 4 is too many.
With regard to the anchor clients, I think it can be very tempting to seek out, spend your marketing dollars trying to spread awareness and seek out shiny brand new clients. But I don't think, across industries, I see businesses not spending enough time nurturing those existing relationships and retaining the clients that they have. And I think if you can create an anchor client out of one of those shiny and new clients, you need to spend just as much time and money and marketing dollars retaining as opposed to generating new.
Good, excellent. Bob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got about 3 that are pretty consistent every year that I can count on. Not on retainer, but just through past relationships. I've only done retainer one time, and I haven't decided whether that's good or that's bad. And the way I did it is they ended up paying me X amount of dollars, and I managed it instead of them managing it. They gave me 20 grand and they said, use it up as you need. And I sent them, as I was using up the money, I sent them an hourly, this is what I worked on. This is what we did until it was all gone. Sam, with you, do you do it that way, or do they pay you? No, how do they pay you a monthly amount?
Yeah, yeah, we agree on a monthly stipend. And if there's travel involved, overnight travel or something like that, I charge for lodging and gas. But if it's local or where I don't have to spend the night, I bill that extra time into my fee. And it's a fixed amount based on a scope of work that we agree on. And I always say, well, let's review it after 3 months or 5 months or whatever. And so it's not totally open-ended on either side. If the work slows down, which it often does, I'll back off. If it's is a lot more than what I anticipated, I'll increase it. And usually everybody's okay with that.
I think that helped Tom Fournier with his question. He asked, how do you recommend structuring a retainer? So you consider the hours that you're going to put in each month, any expenses that you may have if they're not reimbursed expenses, and structure it that way.
Yeah.
Great. A great question from Melissa. How do you determine when your fee is due? Do you do a deposit up front, weekly or monthly billing? Bob, you want to start with that?
Sure. Typically, what I price is I use a fixed pricing. I figure out what it's going to cost for the entire project. I ask for 50% up front and 50% on the day that I actually perform the training. Before I perform the training, I've learned not to wait till after. So what I try and do is make sure on the day I put this in a contract. That on the day I arrive, we'll take care of the business end of it first, and then I'll do your training. And I find that as long as everybody understands what's going on, it works well. The only time I've not done that is I've helped a company out where I asked for 50% up front, and then we broke out the remainder over 4 weeks, and I charged them a weekly amount to help them because they were having a tough time.
Good. Sam, anything to add?
I do something, on a project basis. I'll ask for either half or sometimes a third upfront, depending on the length of the project and what I think they can afford. And again, on occasion, not very often, but on occasion, I'll do a weekly payment plan, just again, where it's from a cash flow point of view, it's easier for them. And
Oh,
that
sorry,
usually
sir.
means they aren't doing a very good job of managing their cash. So I try and, that's an area where I try and help them.
I also send interim invoices to remind them, if I'm doing it on a weekly basis, literally weekly, I'll send them an interim invoice, reminder, this is due, reminder, this is due, and if they are late, then they may not get the training on in the timeline that they wanted, so this is an agreement. To me, it's really important that you set that up on the front end so that everybody understands what's going on.
And that's regardless of who the client is. I don't care if the client's your best friend from college or
I agree.
your father, your mother, like,
Especially if the client's your best friend from college.
yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. One of the things that I'm fortunate with in my business is, and I would call it my anchor client, is I'm on ACH with them. So it's a direct deposit, which I'm very fortunate for that one.
Ooh, I like that.
So if you can set that up and, you get the money is paid, you get the money much faster.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. And it was at their request. I also recommend developing relationships with the people who pay the bills. If you can, so understand their payment process and, and find out who they are and develop that relationship, even a quick email relationship.
Mhm.
One thing overall, I think, Tom, that's worth making clear to me is whether you're working with the kind of clients that you're working with. If you're working with small, medium-sized and small companies, you got a slightly different set of circumstances than if you're working for corporations that are fairly large.
Mhm.
So I think, that has to be obviously considered in your whole, marketing strategy, obviously, but also your pricing.
Yes, well, and that could lead to a question I have laid out for that. If you have a client outside of Maine, do you have a different pricing?
Yes.
I see some head nodding. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have an objective rate that's
Subject.
that most Maine companies couldn't afford.
Mhm.
Just say it that way.
Yeah, Bob, and same for you.
Yeah, I actually have a pricing list, and I've got away pricing, and because of a lot of what I do is seminars, when I go out and do a training, there's a pricing for a particular type of training. If it's customized, it's going to be a little higher, but if it's away, it costs more. Plus, you factor in your travel. You have to include. So the two important things I think for pricing: look at overhead costs and look at direct costs. I think sometimes if you don't figure out it's going to cost you to travel, it's going to cost you for gas, it's going to cost you for, manuals you're going to do. If you don't price that all in, you end up really losing. I remember my very first couple of gigs I did, I ended up using a lot of the money I thought I was going to make to cover expenses because I didn't think of that. So you have to take all that into consideration. The things like indirect cost, your office rent, your utilities, your state taxes, your telephone equipment, your marketing, all that stuff. You have to that has to factor into your pricing. That's that $80 an hour average that a lot of people talk about. So if you're going to try to make $100,000 a year, you have to factor that in. If you're not doing at least $1,000 to $1,200 a day, you're not even going to get close to that.
Correct. Allie, do you have any experience with advising your clients who work outside of Maine? Do they have to think about different pricing or do anything differently?
I think with regard to travel costs, yes. Other than the difference in cost, I would say not so much. I think I often encourage my clients to come up with sort of their service radius too, and decide when they're going to draw the line. If somebody calls from Massachusetts or Virginia, how far are they going to go? What's their limit? Because like I said, I work with a lot of new businesses, so it can be very tempting to just take whatever comes your way. And then all of a sudden they're flying to Georgia to serve it, to do a training. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, is this client really willing to pay what you have to charge them to cover those travel costs? So kind of establishing your boundaries as far as what makes sense to you so that way you're not wasting your time with clients outside of that boundary.
Cool, thank you. Sonia, is that a hand raise or I'm not sure if that, okay. I wasn't sure what you put in the chat. I think an appropriate next question, should a consultant consider contingency pricing if asked? For example, I'll pay you if I see X% of improvement and then the client will pay. So pay for results, I guess, is a way to look at it.
I don't, I won't do that. I know a couple of people that do that, but again, with the kind of work that I do, it would be very hard to measure.
Good.
If I were going to do that, I would first have a base price, and I'd say plus 1% of overall earnings or plus 2%. I wish I had done that with one of the clients, because we took them, the one I was talking about, where I gave them financing to help them out. They ended up the year making $3 million. If I'd have taken 1% of that on top of what I had charged them, I'd have done pretty well. So I would not do it solely based on performance, but I would have a fee and maybe a small factor in on the performance.
Good. Allie, I see you nodding on this one.
Yeah, Bob took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna say base plus some sort of commission, maybe.
And Carrie says she switches to a per diem for away business sometimes, just to take into account the fact that she's hampered in her ability to serve other clients, which makes sense. So, and we think that way too. You know, what's my value for a day, and you know, and then charge the appropriate amount for that. Also, I think we covered just about everything, but one last question that I actually learned early on. Somebody gave me this advice not to do. But if you are ever asked by a client or potential client, what is your hourly rate? And if so, what is your answer?
I duck and weave.
You know, it really does depend. For example, I use a hybrid kind of a thing. I usually charge for the project, but I build into that project an hourly coaching. Like at $150 an hour, I build in 20 hours of coaching. So this is going to be for the training. This piece is going to be for the coaching. And then I use a learning management platform on top of that. And I pre-record the entire training on that, so that they have 3 different pieces. And I'm actually able to charge all 3. If they need to cut back on the charge, I can eliminate some of the coaching as an example. I can bring it down to something a little more palatable for them. But I would not, if someone says, do you charge by the hour? I would say, you know, I don't. I charge by the project. So let's talk about what you want to have done.
Right. Understand the scope.
Yeah.
Tom Kiss says, I
5,000.
say 5,000 an hour, and then I don't have.
That's actually good.
So, and I think that's great advice, Bob, to consider the scope of the project and you know, and help them understand how you approach their business. You know, you're not just going to be there for an hour or 2 to help them out. You want to work on a total project.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Go ahead.
I don't know how many folks on this call are fairly new to their practice, but I feel like when you're just getting started, there's that comfort level. You know, you tend to want to appease people. And if someone asks you that question, it can be tempting to kind of hesitate and try to fumble out an answer. Now, I know, you know, Bob and Sam, you guys have been doing it for a long time, so there's never, it's easy for you to answer that. But when you're new, those pricing put on the spot like that by a client can make you say things, you know, you start to fumble. So I think just be comfortable realizing that, you know, stick to your guns. When they say, do you charge by the hour? You just say, that's not how it's done. And don't let them dictate how you run your business.
Yeah. If you say, for example, I charge $200 an hour, they'll say, I want 2 hours of your time.
Right.
And if what they want done, you can't possibly get done in 2 hours, you're out of business entirely, you know? So it's really important to assess what they need, take in your overhead, assess what they need, decide what you want to make for the year, decide what your billable hours are, and then take that all into consideration when you charge, and then decide, all right, if this project is going to take me 3 days and I charge $1,200 a day, it's going to be this amount of money. And as long as you factored all that in, you're okay.
one of the things that I certainly when I was starting out, I didn't take into consideration enough. Two things. One was the overhead factor that Bob has mentioned. And second is the think time. So, you know, when I price a project, you know, I will sit down and I don't do it so much anymore because I know, you know, kind of instinctively how long it's going to take. But when I used to, you know, do it, I'd actually write down every task or every step in the project and estimate how much time it was going to take. And one of the factors I never put in, which I do now in my general thinking, is what I call think time. Some of my best solutions arrive at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think it's, you know, trying to sell the fact that you've got 3 hours a day or 2 hours a day in a project of tangible time, so to speak, is hard to sell. So I don't highlight that, but it's something to consider when you're estimating how long it's going to take to do a project, that you should be charging for not just the time that you're actually spending on a computer or doing whatever you're doing, but your brain is, you know, most of us get paid for coming up with solutions to things and helping things. So our brain power is worth a lot, and don't underestimate that.
So we have the benefit of, you know, not charging by the hour with our business advising work, but we keep track of metrics and results and whatnot. And one of those things we keep track of is time spent with clients. We have certain goals. We're supposed to spend about 6 hours a day doing either that think time that Sam's speaking about or meeting with clients. And we track it. We track contact time that we spend actually in contact with the client. And then we track what we call prep time, which is the time that you spend reviewing business plans or looking at the client's website before a meeting to get ready. And so maybe it in some way helps you all to think about, okay, here's the time I'm spending face-to-face with the business, but here's the time that I'm spending prepping. And I think you'd be amazed how much that prep time can inflate over the course of a project.
Yeah. So I have an admin fee. So for example, if it takes me 10 hours at $100 an hour, $75 an hour, whatever your admin fee is going to be, that part of the program, and that's kind of how I price it out, is I figured it's easy to do it by the project if you've been doing this a while, because you have an idea of what it's going to take. It's a little harder, I think, when you first start out because you're not sure.
Right.
You know, so that's where daily pricing, I think, comes in a little better. I would say it's probably going to take about 5 days to get this done. I charge $1,200 a day or whatever it is. But Jim, did you say something about $16,000 a day?
Yeah, it's an interesting point at the top. McKinsey partner charges $16,000 per day. Tim Fisk charges a little bit less.
Yeah.
but I think that's a valuable point, is that there are services out there that demand a lot of money. I was having a conversation with a neighbor recently. He's looking for a new CPA, and the reason he was asking me about my wife, is she taking new clients? And if anybody gets any ideas, no, she's not. But he can't find. He said some CPAs won't even talk to you unless you give them $5,000, and it's that competitive out there now. So people aren't afraid to ask for the money. And Tim makes another great point. We often undervalue our services, and you know if you've undercharged because you know the client doesn't question you know what you propose and accept it pretty quickly.
You know, that's a really good point. When I first started out, the very first time I got my first fairly big job is I was getting $1,000 a day, and I was doing 2 seminars a week. So I was getting $2,000 a week, and I thought that was pretty good money. And then I met a guy named Milt who used to be a trainer up and he gets $2,000 for 4 hours. I said, well, how do you do that? He goes, I asked for it. Well, that's interesting. No, the next day I got a phone call from Northeastern Log Homes, and they said, you know, I need a 4-hour seminar up in Burlington, Vermont. You know, they're having their annual conference. What do you charge? I said, $4,000. He goes, well, when can you start? Wow. life changed overnight. So I went from $1,000 a day to $10,000 for a summer. I mean, so it jumps a lot. When you got to think of the value you're providing. What's it going to do for them? It's huge.
Yeah.
There's some psychology behind it too. You know, are you going to hire the cheapest consultant?
True.
You know, you don't fully understand what you're getting with a consultant. I mean, you've got the credibility, they can do a little bit of research, but I mean, think about how often you go shopping and you don't really know much about the product and you associate higher price with higher value.
Yes.
Crazy.
No doubt about it.
Now, Geese just come up with a good question here. I'll throw out to the group. When you start a new business, is it better to do pro bono or start with lower prices to win the client?
Ooh.
I don't, or I try not to. I say I try not to. I'm sure there are, there could be exceptions. Again, what I do is I'll break it down into phases. So instead of, if they're asking for the moon, I'm only going to give them half a moon to cut the, to get the fee down.
I can actually answer that with a story. One of the ACE members that we had asked me to work with her, and she was a graphic artist. And I said, so what do you charge? And she says, like $35 an hour. I said, well, what does a classic graphics artist charge? She said, 75. I said, well, I wouldn't hire you either. You're charging half of everybody else, which tells me immediately you're half as good. So to answer the question, based on your value that you're providing, you're not getting paid based on the fact that you're a new consultant. You're getting based on the value you're providing to that customer. You can come in and lowball it if you want, but if that's one of those customers you're going to get time and time again, try raising your price next time you work with them. It's not going to happen. And if you do, it's going to be really little. Just because they said, well, you came in last time at 20 grand, you're telling me now it's 40, ain't going to happen. So I think it's really important that you come in based on, know what your value is, what you're bringing. So Tom Fournier is relatively new. I think we've had that discussion a while back as a consultant, right? So you're bringing to the table a lot of experience in what you do. Charge for that experience, not for the fact that you're new.
Terry just directed me. I missed a question earlier from Ann. So kind of roll back our thoughts, and her thought was, in keeping with Sam's phased approach, have you thought about a marketing feasibility study to get started with a given client? This seems to be a term business, businesses are used to funding and may welcome it. It will help them decide if they want to move forward with a larger project. Any thoughts on that? So it's a phased-in approach. She says that businesses understand that approach and may help them move forward on a certain project. So I guess a phased-in approach with that project is what she's asking specifically. And please jump in if I mangled that question.
The phased approach, the other selling point to me of a phased approach is it gives both sides an opportunity to get to know each other without having to bite the whole bullet all at once.
Yeah, I work in a relatively new field, and so I have to spend a lot of time balancing how much am I going to educate before I start the meter ticking, and that's a real challenge for me. I work internationally. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., and I do international development, language training for the labor force. Real quickly, we have aircraft mechanics who can't read the manuals, and yet they're repairing U.S. carriers that are sent out to outsourced, inexpensive labor places. So it's a real safety issue for the flying public that the mechanics can't read the manuals that they're supposed to be mandated to follow by the UN's requirements.
Which airlines is this?
Yeah, most carriers send their aircraft to MRO, overseas maintenance, repair, overhaul facilities. That's just one example of what I do. But you'd be amazed, even with that public safety risk, how people won't pay for the services I provide, which is to do language training, English training for aviation, or whatever other field I need to do it in. So I have had real challenges getting people to pay for what I do. And so part of it is that I do a needs assessment of what language is going to be needed, because I customize extremely carefully to get results for the particular outcomes that are needed. And so I'm using terminology. I am experimenting with calling the needs assessment phase a feasibility study and see if that helps them be more willing to pay, because they're used to what a feasibility study does. Any thoughts on that?
I think you make a really good point about tailoring your language to your audience. I mean,
Yeah,
it's very easy to kind of get caught up in your own head and your knowledge, but to be able to put yourself in your
yeah,
customer or potential customer's shoes. I know for me, some of my clients are, like I said, they're brand new to business. Some of them don't even use computers, not tech savvy. So terminology, like I'll use the term target market a lot. And that's one of my favorite, like just concepts. But I've learned that now sometimes even that term target market, I lose them.
yeah.
They need me to use a different wording that makes sense to them. So being able to put yourself in your customer's shoes, it's a valuable talent.
Has anyone used that concept or that idea of a feasibility study as a way to get started with a company?
Yes. Yep, I think it works very well.
Mhm, mhm.
In what way did you use it, Sam?
I call it a diagnostic phase.
Mhm.
So very often when I first meet with a potential client, the client says he's got a marketing problem or he's got a production problem. And I will spend as much time as it takes, like half a day or whatever, to better get to know and meet with the potential client, to better understand exactly what they think they need. And very often what they say they need is not what they really need.
Yeah.
And so I will, either try and clarify it on, before I even write a proposal, or I'll say, look, it sounds like you've got numerous issues that maybe we ought to take a look at and prioritize, not just pick one thing, but just have a priority of what's the most important. And let's start by doing a diagnostic evaluation of your overall business situation. And I start a hell of a lot of projects that way.
And is that built into your pricing?
That's phase one. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Yep.
excellent. Thanks, Ann, for clarifying that.
I have a checklist all ready to go with, or, I have to tailor it obviously to the specific client, but I've got a checklist of information that I'll send, and, once they've agreed to proceed, and they have to supply a whole bunch of information. It's just basic financial data. When was the company formed? Who are the partners? Who are the, players? What's your target market? What, you have any market research information, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you
Sam, how
ask
do you,
about budget? I mean, I've been strung along by people who say they have budget, then they don't, and it's very frustrating to get that duplicity.
I don't waste a lot of time with that because most companies don't have budgets that I work with.
Mhm.
Sam, how do you handle it if your diagnostic phase, if it reveals that what you're recommending that they work on with you does not align with what they want to use you for, and you start to see that and you realize that it's kind of, you're forcing this fit. How do you handle that?
I don't, it's not usually like a light switch situation where all of a sudden it's obvious that, they need something totally different. It's, as we go through the process, it usually that they will come to the same conclusion that I might come to. And if they don't, I don't recall off the top, I don't recall any project that never got to phase two.
Cool.
So it's a selling, it's an education process sometimes. And again, I don't want to work with a company that won't take authorship of whatever it is that I'm going to do with them. They need to believe it's their idea, not my idea. If I can admit that to them, that's going to be a more successful project.
So Melissa has a question, which some have touched on this a bit, but what are a few things that you would do differently in the start of your business, knowing what you know now? So what are you doing differently today than what you did when you first began?
There's not enough time. Oh my word.
I know for me with my advising, again, it's a little bit of a different structure, but in the beginning, I sort of, the first time I would connect with a new client, I would try to prove myself and try to prove my knowledge and answer all of their questions. And I quickly realized that it was more important in the beginning of the relationship, similar to Sam's diagnostic model, to ask more questions and to seek to fully understand their business before I even try to start answering their questions. And I found that over time, the credibility that came along with having that conversation was far more powerful than me sitting there in the meeting trying to prove my knowledge.
Right. Yep.
I think a couple of things. One, realize that you're not going to have 40 billable hours a week. You may work 40 hours a week or more, but your billable hours are what you can actually work with a client with. And typically it's more like 25. So when you're working out your pricing, you want to work it out at about 25 hours. And what that does, that increases the daily amount that you will, or hourly, that you'll be charging, number one. Number two, I would get involved with an organization, and this is not just a plug for ACE, but I got involved with ACE back in 2003, and I didn't know anything. They had a seminar that said, "So you want to be a consultant?" Now, I didn't know what a consultant was, so I attended the seminar. I went, "Oh yeah, I guess I am a consultant, right?" And then they said, "So you made up your mind, now what?" Which is kind of cool. That was the afternoon session, and from that day forward, I've been with these guys. And when I've got a question, I got someone I can call. I've called on Sam. He's called on me. I ended up doing my first national gig with Sam, with the company he recommended before in Chicago, because we were ACE, ACE members. So whether it's ACE or another organization, I think it's important you have someone you can call on, and do that early on so that you can price yourself out right, that you learn how to market and sell your services. Do the seminars that you attend, the training that you attend in many of these are the things that are missing. I think the average consultant I've talked to knows what they do so well that they feel all I've got to do is hang a shingle and people will be the path to their door. Well, that's not true. Number one, people don't know where the door is because they didn't mark it. They don't know where the shingle is because they didn't mark it. And then they don't know how to convey what it is they do enough to sell it. So I think it's really important to become part of an organization and learn to price yourself out right out of the chute. Don't undersell yourself.
Cool, thank you.
I think one of the big differences for me today versus when I first started this is maybe self-confidence.
Yeah.
And when I was first starting, I was hungry. I was scared I wasn't going to be able to make a living. I left a very lucrative, very large position in a major corporation, and convinced my family that this was a good thing for my mental health more than our financial health.
Yeah.
And we starved to death for several years, and getting it started was not easy. And it's the lead time to get into this business for me was extensive. And so I would undersell myself instead of having the confidence that I do today. And that was a mistake. I wish, if I had to do it again, I'd be a little bolder in my approach.
Excellent.
Might have scared everybody to death a little more, but
That's okay. I think I've got all the questions.
I've got one thing to throw out that I don't know if anybody is in this situation, but when I first got into consulting, it was with the Page Consulting Group has been around since 1970. And it was founded by a guy who got his start by doing evaluations for the SBA or SBA banks in Boston when the SBA was brand new back in the early 70s. And during that process, he got to know all of the banks in New England pretty well. And that evolved into banks making loans that weren't good loans. And the banks would call Lang and say, Lang, can you maybe go in and help straighten this company out? So that's how the initial part of Pace Consulting got started doing turnarounds. And anyway, to make a long story short, Lang formed a group of people. At one point, we had 23 consultants, and he got tired of being an administrator instead of being a consultant, and so we cut it way back and formed a group that everyone in the group was carried a card for a Pace Consulting Group, but they were their own self-employed people. So how we structured that, and again, this can work with any group that you may want to work with. And we've done this, I've done this with some of the ACE members that we've collaborated on projects with, is how do you price, when you've got others involved? And the formula that we used with some modifications on occasion was pretty simple. So whatever the fee was, we would take 20% off the top of that fee as a finder's fee. So whoever brought that work in would get 20% of the project, whether they were working on it or not. And that would vary sometimes depending on who wrote the proposal and who finally closed the deal, but up to 20%. 15% would go to Pace overhead to cover our office and website and things like that, which we didn't have websites back then, but the time it took for me or Lang or whoever was running the place to do payroll and do all of, administrative things. And then 65% would go to the consultants doing the work. So I just throw that out, if any of you are working collaboratively with others, you can change that formula any way you want, but that was what worked pretty well for us.
Excellent. Yeah, Stephen Jenks talked about he had a group of 16 consultants who worked independently and jointly for 37 years, and very similar approach. And our resident lawyer says they can't split fees. Well, thanks, panelists. It was great discussion. I will throw it out to anybody else. Any final questions, or toss it back to Terry to close the meeting out. But thank you, Ali, Bob, and Sam for your participation today.
I put a question in the chat box. I just would just ask it real briefly. One project that is possible for me is to do training for a group of universities, and I'm just trying to figure out how to charge. Would I charge per university that comes to the training, or per individual from the university? Anybody thoughts just on that kind of pricing? Obviously, I charge more per university, but I don't know whether it makes more sense to do it by institution or by per participant.
Is your time involved based on per person or per university?
Well, I'll be giving the same seminar. It's a 4 days of 3 hours a day on a particular topic.
I got you.
And the preparation is going to be the same no matter how many people attend.
Yeah, Bob, you know how to do that.
So the hardest thing in the world for these things is filling the seats.
Mm-hmm.
you know, and if you charge only by the head, you could end up losing quite a bit of money. If the organization's asking you to do it, then I would charge, if the same amount of work goes into whether 2 people are there
Yes.
or 10 people are there, then I would charge for the session. That's what I do anyways. If I work with a company, they're going to be responsible for filling the seats. I'm not.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, because boy, that we've tried a couple of public things with ACE, and that's hard to make sure that you get those seats filled. And when you're basing it strictly on that,
Mhm.
especially in this day and age with
Yeah.
now people.
I guess my question, so in other words, I'd have a flat fee per university and they can bring as many people as they want type of thing?
I would.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Thank
make
you.
sure you charge enough. Charge based on, it's very easy to go, wow, I could have 200 people, you know, should I charge more?
Mhm.
You know, if you're going to do the same amount of work either way, and it's not
Yeah.
now, if 200 people are going to go and you're preparing manuals and everything, well,
Yeah.
then you got a direct cost that you got to think about too.
Yeah. No, no. And this is a fairly small group of universities, but they've just come up, they've started to realize the value of what I could bring them. And they're saying, well, we have a group that I've formed within the universities is a group of 11. And they're saying, what about if we open it up to the others and have them charge a higher fee to them because they're kind of external? And it sounds fine to me, frankly, you know, serve my own group. And then if others are interested, you know, to the point that they want to add themselves in, go for the additional people, you know.
I think one thing I'd consider, Ann, is what type of session do you want to have? And if you want an interactive session with participation,
Mhm.
then you probably want to limit the number of people you that attend, because you can't do that with
Yeah.
50 people in one room. It's even challenging with 25 people. But
Yeah.
you may want to limit that and then have multiple sessions for this. If they have 50 or 100 or 150 people that want to attend, say my cap is 25 people, but I can do it twice.
Right.
And you'll charge for that. You may be
Yes.
charge more for the first one and a little less for the second one,
Mhm.
but you want to make sure however many sessions you're doing, you get paid for it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. I don't know what kind of numbers they're talking about, but this is important that it's highly interactive because people's circumstances are so different, and the issues, I work internationally, so I really have to take into account all kinds of different well, time zones, but also the different political circumstances, the economic circumstances in a given country are going to change. So it really has to be very responsive. So interaction is critical. Yeah. So your point is well taken, Tom.
Good. All right. Great discussion.
Thank you kindly.
You're welcome.
Is there any questions on how to determine your billable hours? Does anyone know how to do that? Does it make sense to know what that means?
Nobody's popped that up. I think we covered it in many different ways, whether it be
Okay.
travel or thinking time, or, you know, I think the important thing to take away from this is to, you know, how much time do you put into a project? And if you have to go out of state for it, you got to consider taking yourself away from other clients. You got to consider your travel time, as well as the time you're actually doing it, as well as your prep time.
Yeah.
And I like Sam's thinking time as well, because actually Chat GPT takes a lot of thinking out of it now. You just type it in the computer and it tells you what to think.
Google helps.
Yeah, I actually have a comment on that, as you know, having come from the billable hour world almost exclusively. What I set my billable hour goal based upon what I would like to earn. You know, as I was building the practice, it was largely meaningless because I wasn't going to make that ultimate goal. But what I sometimes do is just record everything as billable time and then assess it for things that really shouldn't be billable and have a write down. And I actually keep track of that in my time and billing software. So if I was inefficient because it was new to me, I will often do a couple of hours markdown for learning curve would be a good way to do it. So it's really a combination of factors. Were you efficient? How much do you want to earn? The think time, I think, is a problem. I definitely need to capture that, but sometimes it's just because I can't stop thinking about the project. And I don't like to charge clients for my own OCD. So anyway, I think it's an art, not a science on billable hours.
So your billable hours for a client is a little different than what I was talking about. Let me give you an example. There's about 260 work days in a year, right? If you're going to take time off, you subtract, say, 32 for vacation, illness, and whatever. You subtract 1 day a week for every 2 weeks, maybe, or every week for 26 days of admin. You factor in prospecting, marketing, you're going to lose 61 days there, and downtime about 25%. That leaves you with 106 billable hours for the year. Now you figure out what you're going to, your hourly rate's going to be, and you can multiply that times 106, and you'll know whether you're going to make the amount of money that you think you're going to make. There's a lot of different ways to go online and look up how to charge. It's amazing how many different formulas there are, but that's a huge part, because I remember I thought I'd be working 40 hours a week and that's my billable hours, and it's not, because you do so many other things. And if you don't take that into account, you're undercharged, way undercharged.
Good. Ali asked about billing software recommendations. Is anybody using anything? I know I use QuickBooks, only because I'm married to a CPA, as stated earlier. So
Yeah. I use Toggle, which is free up to a point, but it allows you to put in detailed time entries. It has kind of a clock function, so you can turn on, turn off, or you can enter manually. And the real benefit is I can download into Excel and edit the Excel spreadsheet and then make adjustments right there. And then I just attach it to my invoice.
What's that called?
Toggle. And then I just turn it into a PDF and attach it to my invoice. And my time in my invoice is usually something on the order of, $10 million per attached, spreadsheet or attached report, so that the detail is in the attachment, not necessarily in QuickBooks.
Nice. A good CRM program for consultants is called Less Annoying CRM. And it's $15 a month. It does everything. It tracks your leads. It tracks your to-do list. It tracks it's a really good, inexpensive way for a consultant to track everything that they do for their clients.
Matthew put in the correct spelling of Toggle is Toggl, and it's good for time tracking.
Cool.
Terry, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much to Ali and Sam and Bob. This has been great. I think that it was a good discussion and we covered a lot of ground today. So I guess we can give everybody 4 minutes of their Friday back, and we will get the recording out, and I'll put out a message when that gets done. And I hope to see everybody at our networking roundtable on Thursday, April 13th at 4:30 at the Sea Dog Brewing Company in South Portland on Western Ave. So everybody have a great day, and thank you very much for attending.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Patty's Day.
Thank you.